It was more than 40 years ago, on Monday, July 27th, 1981, between 12 and 12:30 in the afternoon, when Reve Walsh and her only son Adam went to a Sears store at the Hollywood Mall, the local shopping mall in the city of Hollywood, Florida. Reve wanted to purchase a lamp and left Adam at a new Atari game station in the toy department. The Atari 2600 game was located at a video game kiosk. The game was at an end cap with a TV and 2 controllers, and the kids could play the Star Strike game together. When Reve left Adam at the Atari, he was 3 deep in the line. Reve said, "I'm going over here to the lamp department," and he replied, "Okay, Mommy, I know where that is." Reve looked for the lamp, couldn't find it on the floor, asked the salesperson who checked the back stock, and then Reve left a message with her name and telephone number. She later said, "It was a specific lamp. I'd waited for it to go on sale. I had the ad in my hand." After approximately 10 to 15 minutes, Reve returned to the toy department a few aisles over, and Adam was not there. Let's take a minute to talk about Adam Walsh. 6-year-old Adam was a freckled, dimpled, sandy blonde-haired boy with hazel eyes who stood 3 feet 6 inches tall. That day he was wearing a red and white striped Izod shirt, green Adidas gym shorts, a cream-colored hat with a blue rim, and yellow rubber flip-flops. His nickname was Cooter. Adam loved water sports, sculpting in clay, lunar eclipses, baseball, and drawing. At approximately 12:25 that afternoon, Reve, upon not locating Adam, spoke to an associate. "I'm supposed to meet my son Adam in the toy department. Can you page him?" Reve had Adam paged throughout the mall and continued to search for her son. "Adam Walsh, your mother's waiting for you. Please report to the toy department." While doing so, Reve happened upon her mother-in-law, Adam's grandmother, Jean Walsh, who was also shopping, and Reve asked her if Adam was with her. He was not. Approximately every 15 minutes, Adam's name was paged throughout the store as Reve scoured the store and the surrounding mall. At 1:55 p.m., the Hollywood Police Department was called, and they arrived at the location. By the way, they were right across the street, so I don't think it was a far distance to go. So they arrived at the location and performed a systematic search of both the Sears store and the mall. Witnesses were interviewed. Mind you, these weren't sit-down interviews. These were just simply queries. Initially, the Hollywood Police Department did not think Adam had been abducted. This snippet ran the very next day in the paper, and you can see that the police aide said that kidnapping was not suspected. The kid is probably trying to get home and is probably lost somewhere, and we're searching the city for him. Through a sleepless night, Reve and her husband John waited at the police station. "All I could think of was Adam wearing his slaps," Reve said. "His feet would be tired and scratched. He was bound to be cold in his shorts. I pictured him crawling under a bush somewhere to wait for the morning." Adam's father, John Walsh, worked at the Paradise Grand Hotel as the vice president and director of marketing. Reve was a housewife and part-time student working on her associate's degree at the Broward Community College. She was majoring in interior design and marketing. That day, John Walsh and many of the family members rushed to the scene to try and find Adam. Close family friend James Campbell also rushed to the scene. James had been living at the Walsh residence for 4 years, and he'd moved out approximately 2 to 3 weeks before Adam went missing. Campbell ran a concession stand on Miami Beach, which rented out sailboats and Hobie cats. Walsh and many volunteers distributed 500,000 flyers of Adam in his baseball uniform and hat. I even saw a flyer at a local laundromat here in Orlando. This was the first missing child case in my life, and we were well aware of Adam being missing here in Orlando. Pleading with the public, John Walsh stated that they were willing to negotiate on any terms. "We're not looking for revenge. We're not looking to prosecute these people." The first reward for information for Adam was $5,000, And then, boosted by donations from the public, the reward went up to $100,000. And I think at the very end, it was up to $120,000 in 1981 money. Now, that would be about $365,000 in today's money. John Walsh said, just drop him off somewhere and we'll forget the whole thing. I know that people like to be critical of the FBI, but at that time in 1981, the FBI were prevented from assisting in child abduction cases unless there was evidence that the child had crossed state lines or if a ransom note was received. The case file does show that the FBI was willing to be involved, but you do have to understand that had they become involved and it wasn't legally permissible at that time, then we would be hearing stories of how the FBI swooped in and took away a case from a little local Florida police department. The initial searches for Adam were on foot, door to door, spreading out via helicopter and swamp buggy that you see here in this picture. Remote areas were searched by volunteers. Truck drivers scoured the highways and the byways, commuting with their CB radios. Initially, due to the witness statements, police were looking for a dark blue late model van with mag wheels, dark tinted windows, and a chrome ladder on the rear door. The abductor was bold as brass, as there had been a local police department right across the street from the Hollywood Mall. As the days went by, the police began to understand that this was actually an abduction, and they were chasing ghosts in the investigation. False leads, people with visions, psychics. Anyone with a dark blue van and someone had a beef against them, they would be investigated. Sex offenders were investigated. The mall witnesses were formally interviewed. The Walsh family and friends were interviewed. The police had difficulty in pinning down the exact time Adam went missing initially and who or what was relevant to the abduction. Witnesses in the vehicle seen between, say, 12 and 12:30 were different than the witnesses in the vehicles seen between, say, 12:45 and 1:45, and that would be associated with the blue van. I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant about the fact that it's important in cases like these to be brutally honest with the police, even at the, say, chance that you might lose your job. 14 days after Adam went missing, that's Monday, August 10th, 1981, the severed head of a child was found near mile marker 130 in Indian River County off the Florida Turnpike. That's 75 yards east of what was then mile marker 130. And by the way, it's now mile marker 174. So in the case files, you will also see it listed as mile marker 174. Vernon Bailey and Robert Hughes were fishing and found the head, which they initially thought could be a doll's head. They rode out to the remains and discovered the head of a white male child. It was nearly nightfall. Photos were taken and the fire department searched the canal for the rest of the body. The canal was located on both sides of the Florida Turnpike, and you can see that in the picture here, and it at that time had been a fishing spot. Simultaneously, on August 11th, 1981, the Walshes appeared on Good Morning America to plead to the national audience for Adam's safe return, and on their return back to Florida, they were accosted by the news media. This is the part where I become very pedantic and specific, because there are conspiracy theories going around on the internet and even on YouTube that this was not Adam Walsh, and so I'm going to prove it to you with the case evidence. On the same day, August 11th, 1981, the Hollywood Police Department responded to the scene in Indian River, and a tentative identification was made with the photos of Adam Walsh that the agency had on file, and it matched both the age and the size fit Adam's description. Then John Moynihan, who is a close family friend of the Walshes and John Walsh's boss at different points, and then his partner, drove to Indian River and made the positive identification of Adam Walsh at the Indian River County Hospital. One way that Moynihan identified Adam was by the gap in his upper front teeth and the stub of a new tooth that was coming in. Moynihan had seen Adam a few days before, and that is why he asked to see the teeth. Also, if the conspiracy theorists just took a simple look at the missing persons poster under other, it says missing one top tooth with second tooth coming in. Indian River County Medical Examiner Dr. Franklin Cox made the determination that it was Adam due to the dental records. At 12:40 in the afternoon, the head was flown by helicopter to the Broward County Medical Examiner's office of Dr. Ronald Wright, and it was checked into evidence at 2:15 in the afternoon. Also want to note that Dr. Wright is sort of a hero in the way that he spoke to John Walsh later on. I will get into the specifics of the examination. I just want to note that no less than 4 positive identifications were made between the remains and Adam, first being Moynihan, second being Adam's dentist comparing the examination with his filling with the remains, third the medical examiners, and fourth via mitochondrial DNA match with Reve. These remains are that of Adam Walsh, and putting forth any kind of conspiracy theory otherwise without doing the proper research, it's unfair to the victim, it's unfair to the family, and it just looks ignorant. Dr. Wright did the post-mortem examination. Dr. Berger, Adam's dentist, arrived with Adam's dental charts, his x-rays, and positively identified the remains of Adam Walsh. The upper right incisor was missing and the erupting tooth was coming out. There was an amalgam filling confirmed via x-ray of the lower left last molar, cheek side, that's the buccal side. An amalgam filling, that's metal, was compared with the x-rays, and that you can basically compare that with scientific precision to match. Dr. Wright found 5 distinct blows to the back of the neck and the rear of the skull, as pictured here. The blows were inflicted by a very sharp-bladed instrument of approximately 5.5 inches. The decapitation was performed post-mortem. Death was ruled due to asphyxiation. Some trauma was noted to the right side of the face, and the nose was fractured. The head still had its cranium and its mandible, as well as a portion of the neck, the fragmented cervical vertebra C1 and C2. Dr. Wright concluded that Adam was dead before decapitation and that the victim was struck from behind, likely in the prone position face down, and you can assume that also by looking at the pictures that the head was face down, maybe the chin was tucked in a little bit towards the neck, and that's when somebody struck the blows. It was later determined that the head was likely submerged for approximately 12 days and only had surfaced in the last 24 hours. Dr. Wright noted that due to the liquefied brain matter, yes, and I know this can be difficult to think about, but the head is actually the main evidence. So the liquefied brain matter made them think the time of death had been likely 10 days prior to the discovery of the remains, at least 10 days prior. In other words, it doesn't seem like the Adam was, kept alive for almost 2 weeks and then dumped at the last day. No. The autopsy revealed that there weren't any narcotics in Adam's blood at the time of death, and they also speculated about the hacking of the head, whether it was indicative of a sexual frenzy or if the killer just had plain difficulty doing so. Since they didn't have the rest of the remains, they weren't able to determine whether a sexual assault was involved. When they were cleaning the skull, they did find some evidence, some white fragments, and they were brittle little fragments, probably having something to do with the weapon. It's believed that the fragments were perhaps ceramic, vitreous, or paint material. The file notes the fracture patterns on any one of the 7 edges of the fragments would be sufficient to permit an absolute identification to the surface from which it was broken. Note they never found the tool that matched this. Here are the mitochondrial test results that match the mandible of the evidence found with Reve Walsh. Note, these results support the identification of these remains as Adam Walsh. Dr. Ronald Wright said that they were lucky that the head was found. The skull, which remained in the Broward County Medical Examiner's office, was one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. And he had said if those fishermen hadn't come along, no one would ever have known what happened to Adam. The head was found 120 miles north from the Hollywood shopping center where Adam was abducted. The area at mile marker 130 was searched and yielded no more additional physical evidence. The police also conducted a massive search along the Florida Turnpike for evidence of Adam's remains, which yielded nothing. The Walshes had gone on Good Morning America that day, and they were absolutely stunned when they landed back here in Florida and the press was there, putting cameras in their faces. The police were describing Adam's murder as a psychopath. They were saying that the police had no idea who did it, but whoever did it was just someone sick, very, very sick. The Walshes now tried to lay their son to rest. They had a funeral for Adam with an empty casket, and it was eating the parents alive as the remains were considered evidence. They weren't allowed to bury or cremate their child. And this is the point in the story where John Walsh goes up to Dr. Wright and asks him for the remains, and Dr. Wright says, come into my office, I work late at night. And they have a long conversation. You can see this interview on YouTube. It's a great interview with John Walsh where how he explains how Dr. Wright, through talking to John, explained how John can help other missing children. And it kind of changed Walsh's worldview. So let's talk about the investigation. The police investigated all the people surrounding Adam Walsh and his family. In my opinion, the police cannot be faulted for initially suspecting the family, as statistics prove that missing children go missing as a result of their parents or a family member or someone close to them. And the investigators reviewed, they wanted to firm up the timelines. We're going to go over the timeline again, because that's what the police did. They looked at John and they looked at Reve and they looked at their history and all the people surrounding them. John and Reve Walsh came to Florida from New York. John began working as a lifeguard at the Diplomat Hotel and saved the life of John Moynihan's son from drowning. Moynihan and John Walsh became friends and eventually became business partners. And there's some irony in the fact that John Walsh saved Moynihan's son from drowning, and then Moynihan ends up repaying this favor by being the first person to identify Adam's remains. Life is just so strange, isn't it? That morning of July 27, 1981, Adam watched Sesame Street. Reve and Adam drove in the family's 1979 gray checker car. It was a big car. I think she later said it was the biggest one in the parking lot. Before going to the mall, Reve and Adam left the residence at approximately 11 a.m. and went to the St. Mark's Lutheran School to drop off $90 tuition check to register Adam for his second grade year. Then Reve drove to the Sears Mall, parking her car near the catalog package entrance door. That's the north side of Sears, and that was her habit to do so. She planned to go to the gym after buying a lamp. Reve had been in a bodybuilding tournament and she enjoyed working out. The Walsh house was just 5 minutes from St. Mark's, and then it was 5 minutes approximately from St. Mark's to the Hollywood Mall, just to give you more of a timeline. In an attempt to recall more information, Adam's mother, Reve, underwent hypnosis 4 days after Adam went missing. She recalled arriving at the Sears Mall, parking on the north side of the store. Reve inquired about a lamp that was on sale. It was around 12:05 to 12:10. Reve asked an employee about the lamp. They had checked the stock room but did not have the lamp in stock at the time. The initial saleswoman who Reve spoke to about the lamp was on her lunch break, and Reve left a note for the saleswoman. It was her phone number and her name. Then she returned to the toy department and could not find Adam. After a short period of looking for him, she picked up the house telephone. Those used to be on a pillar at different points in the store. You could access the operator for the mall, and she requested that her son's name be paged. Under hypnosis, Reve also remembered coming across her mother-in-law, but she could not recall seeing anyone suspicious in the store. Reve stated that Adam would never leave the store without her, but that he would follow the instructions of an authority figure. This seemingly was a crime of opportunity, and it made it more difficult to try to figure out who the suspects were. Reve was also given a polygraph, and she passed. The police began investigating James Campbell, age 25, the former house guest of the Walshes. He'd known John Walsh for 9 years. James had been running a boat concession stand for the Golden Strand Motel for the prior 7 months, and the police interviewed people at Campbell's place of business in order to determine that he arrived at work that day at 10:30, as he had said. In his interview, Campbell, his nickname is Dudley, by the way, as in Dudley Do-Right, so we're also going to call him Dudley. He admitted that for approximately 3 years he'd been involved in an extramarital affair with Reve, and that it was ongoing. But he wasn't living at the Walsh residence when Adam went missing, and that the morning that he went missing, he had driven over to the Walsh residence at about 9, and that John typically left for work by that time. So Campbell had breakfast or tea with Reve and Adam, and that Reve asked Campbell if he would take Adam to work with him that day. But see, Campbell told Reve that he was going to be too busy because he had to get the sailboats ready to film for a commercial. It ends up that it was, once he got the sailboats ready when he got to work, but it was too windy of a day for them to film. I think they filmed the next day. But that's, in his mind, he knew that he had to get those boats ready, and it wasn't a good day for Adam to come. Campbell left the Walsh residence at 10 a.m. to go to work, and he stated that he did not kidnap Adam. And his first polygraph was inconclusive, but he was extremely rattled, and because he was one of the first people interviewed and polygraphed, and he passed the second one with no signs of deception. He also underwent hypnosis, and the Walsh family did not believe that Campbell had any hand in Adam's demise, and Reve stated that the relationship that she had been having with Campbell was not serious. Since Campbell had not been out of the Walsh residence but for like 2 or 3 weeks, the police literally seized upon him as a possible suspect. And if you look at the case file, you will see how long they stayed with this Dudley might have done it theory, like this love triangle concept, and they were suspicious of him. But the Walshes weren't, and nobody else seemingly was. And Dudley said that he was thinking that he and Reve were going to get their driver's license that day. But then when he got there in the morning, she told him that she had some other errands to do. And he said that Reve was going to Sears for a lamp, like we've said, and that she was going to go to the gym. And that, Dudley, when he was drilled down and asked about his affair with Reve, he had said that he had hoped to get his life together and that one day that he might be with Reve. But he moved out, and that he was going to prove himself and make his life on his own, under his own steam, and not be living at the Walshes. But he said that there was no hard feelings when he moved out. Even the police said, "We put him through the ringer. We did everything short of giving him a beating. We used some techniques that bordered on violating his civil rights." Well, they didn't border. They flat out violated his civil rights. I mean, read this little snippet. It's crazy. There's no doubt in my mind about why he got an attorney. I mean, I think the Walshes told him, you need to get an attorney, because this went on and on and on, that they were leaning on this guy and he didn't have anything to do with it. John Walsh submitted to a polygraph and gave no indications of deception. In his pre-polygraph interview, John Walsh said that Reve had wanted the lamp at Sears and waited for it to go on sale, and he admitted that he had affairs in his marriage, but he believed that Reve had been loyal to him. He had met Campbell at a hotel job when Campbell was 12 or 13, and John was 10 years older. And the Walsh family called Campbell Dudley and made Dudley Adam's godfather. and Dudley moved out because it was time for him to do something with himself, John said. So at this point in the narrative, Revay's passed a polygraph, John's passed a polygraph, and Dudley's passed a polygraph. So let me go on a tangent because this part is just really important. It's important when you're being interviewed with the police or in a case like this to be painfully truthful about everything, even if you risk losing your job, even if you risk making your employer look bad, even if you're having affairs, things like that. You just got to be completely on it. And as the investigation unfolded, it came to light that a 17-year-old female plainclothes security officer for Sears, her name was Kathy Schaefer, ejected 4 boys from the toy department. Okay, so there was a set of 2 boys that were playing the game and another set of boys that were playing the game. And the police attempted to locate and interview all the different children, witnesses, or anyone who could have seen the children or anyone suspicious in the store that day. And initially, the security guard said that there had been a fight between the children, like an argument, and that she tried to break it up, and that one of the youths became verbally abusive to her, so she told them all to leave. And 2 of the children she thought were together, and she told them to leave via the south exit door, and that the other 2 children were instructed to leave via the east door. And she allegedly said that one of the white children, the second set, was approximately 7 years old, wearing green shorts and a white shirt, but that at that time she believed that it was not Adam Walsh. So she's sitting here allegedly kind of telling the police that it wasn't Adam Walsh. And it wasn't like Sears was screaming it from the rooftops that their security guard, their untrained security guard, tossed kids out onto the street. So mind you, Sears was later sued by the Walsh family on July 22nd, 1983, a few days before the statute of limitations would expire, as you do, right? So, 1981, he goes missing. They've got 2 years to sue, and sure enough, they did. So the lawsuit was for negligence and for wrongful death. And the complaint alleged in part that the toy department, with its video game display, attracted children, and that the store was well aware of child molesters and perverts that were frequenting the department. I just want to say that anyone could put anything they want in a complaint. It doesn't necessarily make it true, but that it was put in the complaint, and that the attorney for Walsh stated instead of ordering Adam out, his parents should have been called. And, suddenly Adam was in a strange parking lot. And no shade to Kathy Schaefer, the 17-year-old underage security guard that allegedly told the children to exit the mall, because hello, she was still a child. She was not trained properly. It's not her fault. Walsh's lawsuit sought to hold the Hollywood Mall and the Sears Roebuck responsible for improper security in the toy department and the parking lot. And the mall's attorney responded, claiming that the child's disappearance was caused or contributed by the negligence of the mother. This is legally called contributory negligence. Sears, through its attorneys, allegedly let the Walshes know that their entire lifestyle would be scrutinized if they proceeded with their lawsuit. The Walshes, they viewed it kind of as extortion, with the attorneys focusing on the housemate Campbell Dudley and his relationship with Revay. And John stated, quote, "Adam wouldn't have been out on the sidewalk if it weren't for Sears. I have every right to sue Sears." Then what Sears did is they attempted to get a hold of the case file. So they subpoenaed the police department to gain access to the case file, which at that time was an open criminal investigation. So then it had to go before the judge to determine whether the case file was a public record, which it obviously is, and whether there was exemptions for active criminal investigations, which of course there are. And so then the judge had to look at it and say, well, yeah, we could do an in-camera review to look through what could be given to the Sears lawyers in this case. And so you know what happens? Of course you know what happens. By November of 1983, the Walshes dropped their lawsuit against Sears. I mean, do you really want, while it's still an investigated case, have parts of it leaked out in a lawsuit? No, you don't. And also at this exact same time, the Walshes were concentrating all their efforts on getting laws passed for missing children, and this lawsuit was interfering with that. And so they went ahead and dropped it. So the police tried to find and tried to interview the witnesses who had been in the store that day, or anybody who had been in that store that day. And one salesperson recalled that there were always fights over that Atari game. Vernon Jones stated, quote, "The problem with that is that we as kids were constantly being chased or kicked out of the area where they would come and they would turn the video game off because we were making too much noise, fighting over whose turn it was, like someone did an illegal move, pushing, shoving, making too much noise." Witness identification, as you know, by the way, is just notoriously imprecise. And one young witness, James Martin, said that the boy, who appeared to be about 8 years old, was wearing a shirt with a collar and shorts. And he said that two black boys were trying to take the controller from this 8-year-old, and that a security guard came over, but he couldn't say if that younger boy, that one that he thought was 8, was escorted out of the store, was also Adam Walsh. So you had a lot of boys playing this game and kind of fighting over it, and then the security guard comes over and she tells 2 to go one direction and 2 to go another direction, and so it was just hard to determine who was in the store at the time Adam went missing. And then you add to it the theory that maybe it doesn't matter at all who was in the store with Adam when he was ejected from the store, because once he hit the parking lot witnesses are completely different from the in-store witnesses. So that's why I was saying it's so important to be precise and to be totally honest that maybe the scene of the snatching was actually outside. And so that's what you needed to focus on, is who was outside, what cars were outside, who was in the parking lot. And had the police known for sure that Adam was taken from the lot versus from inside the store, that changes their focus. So let's talk about the suspects. The first major suspect was Edward Harold James. At the time of the crime, he was alleged to be working at Ted Kratt's construction company in Plantation, Florida. So he was in Florida. On November 17, 1981, he was arrested in Pompano Beach for abducting a little boy, but it really was a little girl, for a ride in his car. And James said it wasn't a little boy, it was a 3-year-old little girl, and that he claimed to be looking for a new apartment to lease when he thought he heard a noise from the rear wheel hubcap of his vehicle. So he stops it, and he claims that when he went to investigate the noise, he left his car door open and one child jumped into his car, so he took the child to get ice cream. James saw a vehicle following him, so he stopped the car and let the child out. Yeah, someone saw him abduct a child, allegedly. And a jailmate of Edward Harold James said that James told him that one time during the summertime, he'd gone into a Hollywood department store and enticed a 6-year-old out of the store by promising ice cream. And he said that he took the boy to Jackson's Ice Cream and then a ride on the turnpike. And he said that the child said, quote, "If you don't take me home, I'm going to tell them what you did to me." So James said he stopped the vehicle by a bridge and forced the boy from the vehicle to the water's edge, that he severed the child's head with a knife and kicked the head into the canal like one would kick a football. And James claimed that the remains are buried in Stuart, Florida, in a phosphorescence mining area. He said that he kept an item of clothing under the seat of his vehicle, but that once the case garnered attention, he discarded the item. So if you look at the date that Adam went missing in July, this guy on November 17th was in Pompano Beach. Is it probable? I mean, he could have done it. So Brevard County obtained a search warrant for this vehicle, which had been detained as evidence in the previous case I mentioned. The vehicle was a 1970 Ford Plymouth Fury, and it was tested for luminol. And sorry for the rattling of papers. Oh, Lord. Luminol tests for hemoglobin in blood. And James had allegedly changed out the front seat of this vehicle in August of 81, so after Adam went missing. And the seat cover now that the police had the search warrant for no longer matched the rear seat of the vehicle. And James claimed that the reason that he changed the car seat cover was that it wore out. but a second search warrant was granted, and the car was investigated under this seat cover, the newer one, and they couldn't find anything. And so years later, Edward James, he also passed a voice stress analysis test. And while James fits the profile of someone who would abduct Adam, James's employer believed that James had been working the day that Adam went missing. So he was finally, I wouldn't say ruled out, he wasn't considered a suspect. And you'll see that inmates that are already serving time will commonly embroider the truth and hear, see a made-for-TV movie on Adam and then start acting as if they did something like that for attention, to make other inmates scared of them, things like that. So that was Edward Harold James. Another suspect was Keith Allen Warren. He came on the police's radar when he attempted to decapitate a victim with a large bladed instrument in Las Vegas, Nevada. The victim was 15 years old. Warren said that his victims were never teens, that he'd never been to Hollywood, Florida. But one of his cellmates said that Warren had bragged about murdering Adam. So the police attempted to determine where Warren had been during the time of the murder. On May 1st, 1981, he was in Monroe County getting his driver's license in Islamorada. Between 1979 and 1982, Warren worked at the Coral Grill in Islamorada and admitted to authorities he committed a murder in Monroe, Florida. He also collected newspaper clippings of mass murders, but claimed he was only writing a book. I guess he was like a web sleuth, huh? He was only writing a book. But he did provide his DNA to the police willingly. And in 2008, Keith Warren was ruled out as a suspect. And then he said that he had only admitted to killing others to, quote, look tough to other inmates. Another suspect in the murder of Adam Walsh was Jeffrey Dahmer. After Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested and received public attention for his gruesome crimes in Milwaukee, various people recognized his photo. On July 30th, 1991, William Bowen came forward. He lived in Hollywood, Florida in 1981, and he remembered seeing Dahmer outside the Sears on the day Adam Walsh went missing. This arrest photo would approximate what he looked like at that time. Another witness who is absolutely convinced that he saw Jeffrey Dahmer that day in the Hollywood Mall was Willis Morgan. He also has a website called Frustrated Witness. He recalls being in the Radio Shack on the day that Adam Walsh was abducted, and that he believes Dahmer approached him and was talking to him, maybe to try to pick him up, but then he ignored Dahmer and Dahmer stomped off, and he followed Dahmer. He stated that he followed Dahmer to the toy department because Dahmer was acting suspicious. Another witness that came forward decades after they saw Dahmer's picture was Janice Santomassino. She said that she drove her daughter and her son to the Hollywood Mall on Hollywood Boulevard, and that after nearly slamming into the back of a blue van that was parked illegally outside of the west entrance of the Sears, she went inside. And that she said that she wanted sandals for her little daughter, but that the girl wanted to play the Atari. And that when the mother approached the game, there was a little boy there in an oversized hat, shorts, and a striped shirt, and that they played for 10 minutes. And that she said that she looked down the aisle and saw a disheveled man, and that when her eyes met, she felt it was spooky. And then once Dahmer was arrested, she saw his picture, and she thought it looked like the guy that she'd seen that day. On July 31st, 1991, the Hollywood Police Department contacted the Milwaukee Police Department to inquire as to Dahmer's timeline, and they found that Dahmer had been discharged from the military and flew to Miami. In March of 1981, so think that's a few months before Adam went missing, after a week, Dahmer was sleeping on the beach in the public areas of Miami. So by that time, he'd blown through whatever money he had from the military, and he was in Miami, and He was found rummaging through the dumpster behind a little restaurant. What would you call it? Like a fast food place in a strip mall. They offered him a job. So Dahmer got a job at Sunshine Subs, and he worked there from April to September of 1981. So that bookends around the time that Adam went missing. And he allegedly was paid off the books at Sunshine Subs. And while he worked at Sunshine Subs, they allegedly had a blue Dodge cargo van that was sometimes used for deliveries between that store and another store they owned. But the owner said that Dahmer was not known to use the vehicle because he drank alcohol. At the time of the abduction, Dahmer lived at the Bimini Hotel on Collins Avenue. Dahmer denied kidnapping Adam Walsh, and he stated, quote, "If I killed Adam Walsh, I would tell you." Dahmer wanted to die, and admitting to yet another killing, especially one of a young child, would have gotten him killed by the state of Florida more than likely, or another inmate. And by the way, he was killed by an inmate. Part of me agrees that if Dahmer had killed Adam Walsh, he would have readily admitted to it. Just like he readily admitted to all his murders in great detail. Again, he said, "I would welcome the death penalty." However, having said this, there are people that are convinced that Jeffrey Dahmer killed Adam Walsh and that it wasn't Toole. And there is information in the file in the state of Florida. If you care to look, there's information that could support that theory, if that was what you wanted to believe. And you could think, like, what was his MO? Did he behead his victims? Sure, he did. Did he choose victims of opportunity? Yes, he did. His 3 arrests in Milwaukee between 82 and 87 did involve crimes against children. But Dahmer did not own a vehicle in 1981, and so it would hinge upon him having taken the work van, not being at work, having the day off, taking the work van, kidnapping Adam, murdering him, putting the van back in its place without anyone noticing, and also he had his denials of it. So, in September of 1981, Dahmer left the state of Florida. He left Miami for Ohio. So, less than a month after Adam's abduction and murder, Dahmer left the state. For more on this theory, you can go to Justice for Adam on the internet. And there's a book, I believe, called Frustrated Witness. I have not read the book, but I have listened to interviews from Willis Morgan, who believes that Jeffrey Dahmer did it. For those who believe that Dahmer, in fact, did it, they think that we're relying too much on his confessions, that he was truly candid in the end. And they note that Dahmer lied for years to his father, that Dahmer lied to his own attorney, who his own attorney has given interviews admitting that, and that the Dahmer lied to the police. For example, whenever one of his victims got away, and he lied convincingly to the police, who sent the victim right back into his clutches. So, yeah, Dahmer could lie convincingly when he wanted to. And finally, we come to the suspect, Otis Toole. Drifter and pyromaniac Otis Edward Toole was originally from Jacksonville, Florida. He was locked up in the Duval County Jail for arson and homicide, and he came onto the police's radar on October 11th, 1983, when he began confessing to Detective Kendrick of Brevard County Sheriff's Department. And yeah, if you wonder why does that name sound familiar, is because he was discussed in Madam X. Kendrick was one of the sheriffs discussed in that case. So at that time, Florida was having a spate of serial killers. Toole became emotional and began hinting around to Kendrick regarding the murder of a child. On October 19th, 1983, Detective Bud Terry of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Department heard Toole confess that he had abducted a young boy from a Sears Mall in Fort Lauderdale and killed him. Toole confessed that he and an associate, Henry Lee Lucas, had abducted a boy from outside a Sears. The boy was between 7 to 10 years old, wearing blue jeans, blue shirt, and sneakers. So note, the clothes are incorrect and the age is incorrect. And Toole said he was driving a black over white Cadillac, and that after Henry Lee Lucas took the child, they drove north on the turnpike. Toole stated that the child was uncontrollable and Henry Lee Lucas told him to pull off the turnpike. Toole drove down a dirt road and stopped the car. The child was held down by Toole as Lucas chopped his head off with a machete. He said that the child was face down and took 3 to 4 blows to the head. Note that it was later determined that Henry Lee Lucas had been in jail on the date Adam went missing and unable to have committed the crime, as he was incarcerated in Maryland. The next day, Toole was shown information that Lucas had been in custody during the date in question. Toole then tailored his confession and said that he abducted and killed the child by himself. And he said that he implicated Lucas to get back at Lucas for killing Toole's niece. Throughout the years, Toole went back and forth, confessing and recanting. He recanted at least 4 different times to the kidnap and murder of Adam Walsh. And Toole stated variously, these are bullet points, by the way, he enticed the child with candy and toys into his car. Another account had him taking him to see his father. He claimed that he lured Adam Walsh from a bus bench outside the Sears. He then used the Cadillac's automatic door locks to keep the child inside. By the way, the Cadillac did have automatic door locks. He drove approximately 10 minutes before he got on the turnpike going towards Jacksonville. Well, the head is in a direction going towards Jacksonville, so that is seemingly accurate. He killed the child because the child was smart and would recognize Otis. He hit the child until he was unconscious, placed him face down, chopped off his head with a machete or a bayonet with 4 to 5 chops. And that would fit in with what the medical examiner found about the number of chops, which allegedly wasn't released to the public at that time. That he placed the head on the front seat of the Cadillac and then on the back floorboards and traveled north for 10 minutes and tossed his head into a canal with a little wooden footbridge. He said that he was driving a black over white 1971 Cadillac owned by Faye McNett. He said that she had repossessed the vehicle when Toole failed to make the payments. On October 20th, 1983, Toole told one detective that he initially wanted to keep Adam for himself to raise, but that Adam kept saying he wanted out of the vehicle, and if Otis took him back, he wouldn't tell anyone, and that Otis said he put the body in a, quote, pond, and they, quote, must have found some blood on the dock. The 1971 Cadillac was located in a Jacksonville car lot. The FDLE obtained a search warrant and searched the Cadillac for hair, blood, fibers, and latent fingerprints. There was no trunk liner in the Cadillac. November 2nd, 1983, they performed luminol tests on the interior. So the luminol was presumptive for blood on the carpet from the floorboards. That's the driver's side and the back seat floorboards. The seat belt, I believe, was negative, but the luminol yielded positive results for the front floor area of the driver's side, where the driver's feet would rest. It was also positive for the left rear floor area where the blood had been on the carpeted floor. The police cut away all the suspect areas, and vacuumed those areas for fibers and hairs. They also dusted the Cadillac for fingerprints. Further testing was needed to determine if the blood was human or animal, but it was blood. Later, one investigator thought he could see the imprint of Adam's face in the luminol. This picture is from the book Bringing Adam Home. To sum up the car evidence, it was in October 1983 when the Jacksonville FDLE processed the 1971 white Cadillac with the black vinyl top. The processing was completed on November 2nd, 1983. Items 7 through 14, cuttings from the driver's carpet and cuttings from the left rear carpet, were all taken. Although all the areas had yielded a positive indication for blood via luminol, it was insufficient for further testing at that time in 1983. They couldn't even determine if the blood was animal or human. So essentially at that time, it wasn't considered to have current evidentiary value. So Jacksonville, this is where you get the big rub here. Jacksonville gathers, they process, and they seal the items for delivery to the Hollywood Police Department. So they know that there's blood in the car, but they don't know if it's animal or human, and they don't have enough of it to test further. So it's held for 6 months in Jacksonville because the Hollywood Police Department didn't come and pick it up. So on November 18th, 1983, items 7 through 14 had been left in the 1971 Cadillac along with 3 boxes of carpet. The Hollywood Police Department came and retrieved item 15. Item 15 is a machete and a canvas sheath. Okay, so they came to Jacksonville and took that one item, but they left everything else there in Jacksonville. Allegedly, the reasoning for leaving the evidence there was that the car was held in Jacksonville because Tool was also being held in Jacksonville at that time. Subsequent investigation revealed that Tool had both access to a bayonet and a machete. However, the print that was found on the electrical tape that was once around the machete handle did not match Tool. The police took Tool on a trip to the crime scene, and I call this fried chicken and field trips. People wonder why in the world some of these serial killers or some people who are in jail that aren't looking to get out anytime soon confess to crimes they did not commit. Sometimes it's for fried chicken and field trips. And if you wonder what the heck I'm talking about, think about how you may have been in isolation due to COVID for a year, what that would feel like to get out in the sun, eat some free fried chicken catered by the police department, and to go on a nice field trip. That's why. So you get out of the cell and you get to go and do stuff and be the big guy that everybody's paying attention to. Fried chicken and field trips. And I'm not implying that it's wrong to take these people to have them lead you to a body, like say Ted Bundy would lead people to bodies. I'm not saying it's wrong for the police to do it. I'm just saying when you have someone constantly getting out of the cell on a body find and you never find anything, sometimes you got to realize they're the fried chicken and field trips kind of guy. The police tried to trick Tool by taking him to a different mall first. They took him to the Broward Mall in Plantation, Florida. And Tool said that it wasn't the parking lot and the mall was single level, not double level, like the place where he abducted the child. The police then took Tool to the Sears Mall in Hollywood, Florida, and he said it looked familiar. So they broke for lunch, and after lunch, they came back and visited the same mall from a different direction, approaching the parking lot by the north side of the Sears catalog exit door. And Tool was more sure that this was the mall. The police then allowed Tool to try and identify the area, the place where he pulled off the turnpike. And after a few attempts at mile marker 126, that was back then, it was mile marker 126, it's now been renumbered, Tool advised that it looked like the area he beheaded the child. Tool mentioned the road area had a fork in the road. Then at mile marker 130, the officer stopped the vehicle and took Tool to the drainage ditch from where the head had been recovered. And Tool identified the wooden walk bridge and said he had walked on it and tossed the head east of the bridge. But note, on October 19th and October 20th, Tool had been shown a photo of the crime scene which showed the canal and the wooden bridge. They traveled back to mile marker 126 where Tool said he had buried the victim off the roadway in an area just north of the paved road, south of the water area. Tool stated that his memory was poor because he'd been intoxicated when he committed the crime. The owner of the land was contacted and gave permission for the site to be investigated. The landowner told police that the guardrail present had only been up for 10 months, and before that it had been a wire fence which was commonly breached by hunters. The FTLE probed the land with steel probes and then ground-penetrating radar from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They located 7 possible unidentified objects to dig up. They used a front loader and uncovered no evidence. The police could not find Adam's remains where Tool said he left them. On November 19, 1983, Toole changed part of his confession, stating that he took Adam's body, the remaining torso, to Jacksonville and burned it on his mother's property. He stated that he drove to his mother's burned-out residence at 708 Day Avenue, placed the torso in a gutted-out refrigerator in the backyard, and tried to burn the body. Unable to do so, he shoveled the remains into a blanket wrapped in the trunk. Fearing that the body would catch fire, as it was not yet cool, he watered down the trunk, took the body to the dump, removed the carpet from the trunk, and disposed of all of it. Wells brothers did confirm that when they took in the vehicle, it had no carpet inside the trunk. In November of 1983, after the car and other evidence was examined, the police were only left with Toole's confessions and recantations, and they were not willing to present the case to the state attorney at that time. On December 29, 1983, police searched the property of Toole's mother. That was the burned-out property at Day Avenue, and they recovered a pair of light green shorts and a yellow rubber shoe. The Walshes said the garments were not Adam's, but allegedly the Walshes were not even shown the items for years, and one must wonder why. Did the investigator know right off the bat that it wasn't Adam's, so they didn't even bother showing the Walshes? It's just not known. On January 5th, 1984, the rear yard of the same property at 708 Day Avenue was excavated by the FDLE, and they only found animal bones and not human bones. On May 24th, 1984, the 1971 Cadillac and all the items sealed within it was found still in evidence at the FDLE. The vehicle, no longer drivable, was towed to the rightful owner and released, as Hollywood Police Department had not picked it up. The rightful owner eventually sold the vehicle for scrap, and the car was junked in 1985. Guys, this is a part of the investigation that is just unbelievable, because although at that moment when they couldn't determine whether the blood was animal or human, there was a chance that science would progress, and science has progressed. So now we'll never know whether the blood that was in that car was Adam's or not, because all of it was sent to the scrapyard. This article reads, "We left Toole's car with the Jacksonville police and allowed them to get rid of it," Wood said, and the patch of carpet from the car that had blood on it disappeared. Throughout the years, Toole kept confessing and recanting. On October 20th, 1988, Toole told police about a Japanese army bayonet at his sister Vinette Cypher's residence. Also, this bayonet had been recovered from her, and none of the weapons submitted in Toole's case. The machete, the bayonet, and even 2 other weapons, none of them matched the marks on the victim's remains. This document reads, "Several suspected cut marks are present on the cranium, mandible, and cervical vertebra. Each suspected cut mark was photographed using 35mm technology. For purposes of comparison to the suspected weapons, each instrument was photographed and the cutting edge molded with an epoxy-like resin. In addition, certain suspected cut marks on the cranium and mandible were also molded. Results of these comparisons will be enumerated in Dr. Syme's appended report. Basically, none of them matched." And this is the report on the fingerprint that was on the electrical tape around the machete, where it says that the above listed prints were not made by Otis Elwood Toole. So that didn't match either. However, in 1997, they still had the hair and the fibers that had been suctioned out of the vehicle. And so they examined those. As you can see here, the different exhibits that were looked at. And sadly, out of all the hairs, even the ones that still had the root attached, they were amplified by PCR. They were typed for genetic markers, but they couldn't get a result on the hair. The hair was simply too degraded. Even Adam Walsh's hair was too degraded for any kind of comparison. I think that's part and parcel why they did the genetic comparison between the mandible and Reve, so that they could have a good DNA sample on file for Adam, because they really didn't have anything. due to Toole's vacillation between confessing and recanting and not having a lot of circumstantial evidence, the investigators sought to nail down Toole's timeline to rule him in or rule him out. And both Toole and Henry Lee Lucas were serial confessors. This is making it more difficult. I mean, was it even possible for Toole to abduct Adam Walsh? So what the investigators do is they drill down on his timeline and they called everybody. They contacted every agency known to mankind. That's one reason there's 10,000 pages in the file. So this is the end of part 1. In part 2, we're going to go over Toole's timeline. We're also going to talk about the later investigation of Adam Walsh's kidnapping and murder, the ensuing years, more interviews, more re-interviews. We're going to talk about how this case was closed. And we're also going to talk about Adam's legacy, which is perhaps the most important thing that went on in this case, is the legacy that Adam Walsh has left. So, if you're interested in part 2, please hit that subscribe button. I should be uploading that in the next few days. I hope you found this is informative. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Bye.